Welcome to Order Before Modern Systems. Here, we explore how everyday order functioned before modern systems, institutions, and formal rules existed. This channel examines how routine, habit, and shared expectations shaped daily life long before modern organization took form. For most of human history, there was no modern police department, no 24-hour emergency number, no citywide camera system, and no central database to track people. Yet communities still tried to control violence, theft, fraud, and disorder. They did it through systems that depended on something simpler: people being seen. In earlier societies, being visible mattered because law worked through neighbors, relatives, local officials, and public spaces. A person's behavior could be rewarded or punished through reputation. Witnesses mattered more than paperwork. Public actions had public consequences, and many rules were enforced not by specialists, but by ordinary people who were expected to respond when trouble happened. This video explains how visibility shaped self-control and conformity before modern law enforcement across several historical periods. It focuses on crime, justice, investigation, and punishment, and it shows why being observed was often the strongest tool a community had. Start with a basic problem. In a world without professional police, the state had limited reach. A king or central government might issue laws, but it did not have enough trained staff to watch every street, travel every village road, or investigate every theft. Most people lived in small communities where daily life happened face to face. That closeness could create safety, but it also created pressure. When people live close together, much of life is public. Work happens outdoors or in shared spaces. Travel happens on common roads. Buying and selling happens in markets. Worship happens in crowds. Water comes from shared sources. In these settings, people naturally observe one another. That observation did not need to be constant to be powerful. If you know that your actions might be noticed, reported, and remembered, you may control yourself even when nobody is watching at that exact moment. In older systems, this was not an abstract idea. It was built into how communities handled suspicion, accusation, and response. One of the most important features of older justice systems was that they often depended on public knowledge rather than private investigation. Today, investigators may reconstruct events through forensics, recorded video, phone data, and lab tests. In many earlier periods, the main technology of investigation was human attention. That made visibility a kind of evidence. If a crime was committed openly, the community could respond quickly. If a crime happened in secret, it could be much harder to prove. So many legal practices were designed to pull wrongdoing into the open, or to punish secrecy itself. This connects to a key point. Older systems often focused less on solving hidden crimes and more on preventing open disorder. Their goal was frequently to keep the peace, meaning to stop conflicts from spreading and to maintain a stable daily life. Visibility helped because public order is easier to measure than private wrongdoing. In medieval and early modern England, for example, the law developed practices that assumed community participation. Two ideas show this clearly: collective responsibility and public pursuit. Collective responsibility meant that small local groups could be held accountable for the behavior of their members. One well-known example is the Frank Pledge system, which organized many adult men into tithings, meaning small groups linked by mutual responsibility. If someone in the group was accused and failed to appear, the group could face penalties. That created a strong reason to monitor one another's conduct, discourage risky behavior, and pressure suspicious people to comply. This kind of system made observation part of local safety. People were not only watching to protect themselves, they were watching because they could be punished for what they failed to stop or failed to report. Public pursuit worked through a practice often described as hue and cry. If someone witnessed a serious crime or saw a suspect fleeing, the law expected them to raise an alarm. The shout or signal was meant to spread from person to person and from one place to the next, so that the suspects could be chased and captured. Under the Statute of Winchester of 1285, communities had legal duties tied to watch, pursuit, and accountability when offenders were not caught. In a system like this, visibility had two jobs. First, it created the chance of immediate action. If a thief ran, the whole point was that others could see the flight and join the chase. Second, it created after-the-fact evidence. If enough people saw the suspect, the community could identify the person and link them to the act. Now consider what that means for everyday behavior. If you live in a place where many people know you, and where the law expects those people to respond together, your choices are shaped by the possibility of being recognized. This is also why older societies put so much weight on reputation. Reputation served as a social record. It helped others decide whether to trust you, trade with you, employ you, marry into your family, or stand up for you in a dispute. A good reputation could protect you. A bad reputation could make you vulnerable. In many places and periods, courts depended heavily on witness testimony. That raised an obvious question: whose word counted? The answer often depended on status and reputation. Communities treated certain people as more credible, meaning their statement carried more weight. This could reflect landholding, gender, occupation, or social rank. Even when that system was unfair, it still shows how strongly visibility mattered. Being known, being recognized, and being seen as steady and lawful could shape the outcome of conflicts. Local officials were also part of this visibility system. Before modern police forces, many areas relied on constables, watchmen, and local courts. These were not always full-time professionals. A constable might be a local figure, chosen or required to serve for a period. Watchmen might patrol at night, especially in towns, to watch for theft, fires, or disorder. Their power often included stopping suspicious people, controlling movement after dark, and holding strangers until morning under certain rules. Night was a special problem because darkness reduced visibility. When a society depends on community observation, nighttime creates risk. People can hide their identity, move without being recognized, and commit crimes unseen. That helps explain why many older systems were strict about night walking, curfews in practice even when not called that, and suspicion towards strangers outside after dark. This was not only about crime in the modern sense, it was also about controlling social disorder, fights, drunkenness, and gatherings that might lead to violence. In other words, when people could not easily be seen, authorities sometimes responded by limiting movement or increasing inspection. So far, we have discussed how visibility supported prevention and pursuit. But visibility also shaped punishment. In many older justice systems, punishment was not mainly about hidden correction. It was about public demonstration. Public punishment made the consequences of wrongdoing visible to everyone. Stocks and pillories, for example, were punishments designed to shame. Whipping could be carried out publicly in some periods. Even fines could be announced and recorded in local memory. The idea was not simply to hurt the offender. It was to communicate. The community was meant to see that rules existed, that authority had teeth, and that breaking the peace had social costs. Public punishment also reduced the need for ongoing supervision. If the goal is to control behavior without a large professional force, it helps to have punishments that teach lessons quickly and broadly. A crowd gathered at a punishment site becomes an audience. The punishment becomes a message. But there is another side to this. When punishment is public, it also uses the community itself as part of enforcement. The crowd's attention, ridicule, and memory become tools that can strengthen conformity because people fear public disgrace. It can also create abuses because public shame can be harsh, uneven, and hard to escape. In systems of public punishment, being seen is both a risk and a method. This connects to how older societies managed truth and accusation. Without modern forensic tools, societies needed ways to decide what happened. Some relied on sworn oaths, sometimes supported by oath helpers who backed a person's credibility. Some relied on community juries that did not simply weigh evidence like modern juries, but also contributed local knowledge about the people involved. In such systems, secrecy could be dangerous. If you were accused, you might need others to speak for you. That meant you needed social ties and a stable reputation. This also meant that outsiders, travelers, the very poor, and people on the margins could be at greater risk. If few people knew them, they had fewer defenders. And if they were seen as suspicious, observation could quickly turn into accusation. So visibility could protect, but it could also trap. To understand why being observed shapes self-control, it helps to break down what observation actually does in a community. First, it increases the chance of being identified. In a small village or neighborhood, identity is not stored in documents alone. It is stored in recognition. People know your face, your family, and your habits. If you steal from a neighbor, you cannot easily hide. If you start a fight, many will remember. Second, it increases the chance of immediate intervention. If someone tries to break into a shop in a crowded area, a bystander can shout, grab the person, or call others. The same logic applies to fights, harassment, or disorder. Third, it creates memory. If a community sees you act violently or dishonestly, the event becomes part of what people know about you. Even if no formal record exists, the social record lasts. Fourth, it creates pressure through shared responsibility. When systems require ordinary people to participate, by raising alarms, joining pursuit, or producing suspects, each person has reasons to pay attention. This makes observation a civic duty, not just curiosity. Fifth, it shapes daily habits. When you expect that neighbors might notice your behavior, you may avoid actions that would bring shame or suspicion. That is self-control created by social visibility. This is the same basic mechanism that later thinkers described in more formal terms. The philosopher Michel Foucault, writing about modern institutions, argued that the feeling of being watched can change behavior even if no one is watching at a specific moment. In his discussion of panopticism, he described an arrangement where people behave as if they are under constant observation because they cannot be sure when they are being observed. That idea is often linked to prisons and later institutions, but it also helps explain older community systems in a simpler form. In a village where everyone knows everyone, you do not need a tower or a special building. Social life itself can act like a constant field of attention. But older systems were not only village-based. Towns and cities developed their own approaches. As cities grew, face-to-face recognition became harder. A person could move through crowds and be less known. This created new problems. More strangers, more anonymous movement, more hidden theft, and more disorder at night. Cities responded by creating more formal watch systems. Watchmen patrolled, checked doors, watched for fires, and challenged suspicious people. Some towns organized watch and ward, meaning both nighttime patrol and daytime guarding responsibilities. These systems were still limited. They did not have radios, cars, or forensic labs, but they increased visible authority. A uniformed or recognized watchman standing in the street signals that someone is paying attention. That signal matters, even if the watchman is not everywhere, because the power of visible authority often comes from the possibility of being noticed, not from constant direct supervision. Markets are another place where being seen mattered. Market rules were important because markets were central to survival. Food quality, honest weights and measures, fair prices, and lawful trade were not only economic issues, they were public order issues. Local courts and officials often enforced these rules by inspection, public presentments, and fines. In some places, local juries reported offenders. These practices made economic behavior visible. If a baker cheated customers, people might notice. If a vendor used false measures, the community could report it. If a person sold goods unlawfully, word could spread. This is another form of social control through observation. The market is a public stage. Dishonesty there is more likely to be exposed. Religious life also contributed to visibility. In many periods, religious institutions shaped moral expectations and community discipline. Regular gatherings meant regular observation. People saw who attended, who avoided, who behaved respectfully, and who caused disturbances. In some places, religious courts or community discipline practices addressed moral offenses that today might not be treated as crimes, such as public drunkenness, sexual misconduct, or disruptive behavior. Whatever one thinks of those rules, they show again how being seen mattered. Private actions were harder to control, public actions were easier. This leads to a central theme. Before modern systems, control often worked best when it focused on outward behavior, fighting, stealing openly, disturbing the peace, refusing to cooperate, traveling suspiciously, or violating visible community standards. Hidden crimes were harder. That does not mean older societies ignored hidden wrongdoing, but it does mean their tools were different. They relied more on confession, rumor, patterns of reputation, and the willingness of witnesses to speak. These are all tied to visibility in some way, because they depend on what people know, see, and share. In this world, conformity was not mainly created by distant rules written on paper. It was created by daily exposure to other people. Now consider how this affected self-control. Self-control is not only an inner choice, it is also a response to external risks and expectations. If a person believes that misbehavior will be noticed and punished, whether by formal authority, by neighbors, or by family consequences, then restraint becomes a practical strategy. You can think of it as a balance of costs. In a society where theft might be met by quick pursuit, where strangers are challenged at night, where a local group can be fined for failing to produce a suspect, and where punishment may be public, the cost of being caught is high. And because the community is close, the chance of being recognized can be high. So a person may decide that it is safer to follow norms. This does not require perfect enforcement. It relies on uncertainty. If you cannot predict when someone will see you, you may behave cautiously more of the time. This same logic can apply to people who are not planning serious crimes. Small daily choices, whether to argue loudly, whether to cheat a customer, whether to carry a weapon, whether to threaten someone, can be shaped by the presence of watchers and witnesses. In older settings, watchers were often ordinary people. That raises an important point. Visibility worked because communities were expected to participate, raising a hue and cry, joining pursuit, reporting wrongdoing in local courts, serving on juries, acting as constables or watchmen. These duties spread the work of enforcement across society. This was not always voluntary. It could be required. When participation is required, people must pay attention. And when people pay attention, behavior changes. But there were limits and problems. Visibility-based systems can be uneven. They can focus on those who are most exposed in public, while ignoring crimes committed privately by powerful people. They can target outsiders. They can turn rumor into punishment. They can encourage conformity even when rules are unjust. They can also fail when social bonds weaken. If a town grows large, people become less known. If communities become more mobile, reputation becomes less stable. If economic life becomes more complex, fraud can become harder to spot. If people stop cooperating, collective enforcement weakens. These pressures help explain why, over time, many places developed more professional systems, full-time police, centralized courts, trained investigators, and prisons designed for long-term confinement. Even then, older ideas did not disappear. Modern systems still use visibility, patrol cars, uniforms, street lighting, cameras, public trials, published rules, and visible consequences. But before modern law enforcement, visibility was not just a tool among many. It was the main structure that held the system together. It worked through three connected layers. The first layer was everyday community observation. Neighbors watched neighbors. Reputation grew from repeated contact. Public life made people recognizable. This produced informal discipline. The second layer was local responsibility and response. Communities were expected to act. They raised alarms, pursued suspects, and produced accused persons for courts. Local officials like constables and watchmen acted as visible reminders of order. The third layer was public justice. Courts relied heavily on witness knowledge. Punishments were often visible and meant to communicate. The goal was to make law something people could see. Put together, these layers created a system in which being seen mattered because it linked behavior to consequences. Visibility increased the chance that an act would be noticed. Being noticed increased the chance of a response. Response created memory. Memory shaped reputation. Reputation shaped trust, opportunity, and vulnerability. And knowing all of that shaped self-control. This is the core idea. When formal surveillance is limited, social visibility becomes a form of governance. People do not only follow rules because they believe in them. They also follow rules because they live among other people. And those people watch, remember, and react. In earlier periods, that was not a side effect. It was the design. Understanding this helps explain many features of pre-modern justice that might otherwise seem strange. Why were communities fined for failing to catch offenders? Because the system needed communities to watch and respond. Why were punishments public? Because the system needed consequences to be visible. Why were strangers treated with suspicion at night? Because darkness reduced the power of recognition. Why did reputation matter so much? Because without modern records, social memory was the record. Why did local courts depend on local knowledge? Because investigation was mostly human observation. When we look across historical periods, the details change, but the underlying pressure often stays the same. Before modern policing, law was not mainly a distant institution. It was a shared practice, built on what people could see and what they were expected to do about it. In that world, visibility was not just about being watched by authorities. It was about being watched by everyone. And because everyone could be a witness, being seen shaped how people carried themselves, how they behaved in public, and how closely they stayed within the expected boundaries of their community. That is why being seen mattered.